We leave that for the moment.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. So,
Good
good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What an amazing theatre we have here, and it's so lovely to be part of the congregation and be back at Ashford Castle and be back home, actually, which is rather nice. I was brought up in Leeds. My name is Daphne McKinley. I guess you probably guessed that at this stage. My day job is I'm a property developer actually in London, working in the first-time buyers area where we're supplying high-rise flats for on the government help to buy scheme. I'm also the mother of 3 children and 2 grandchildren, which I'm enormously proud of. We are a motorsport family, which is what I'd like to speak to you about tonight, my ideas around motorsport. And the reason I'm a motorsport family, or we are a motorsport family, is I actually ended up marrying a Formula 1 driver by the name of Guy Edwards. And some of you may recall back in the 70s, late 70s, there was a terrible crash where Niki Lauda at the Nürburgring ended up in this ball of fire with him and James Hunt. My husband was one of the drivers who actually saved Niki from that crash and saved his life, and was awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal for his part in that rescue. Our son, Sean, of course, with the DNA of the motorsport family, ended up doing exactly the same as his father and became a professional racing driver. To great success, actually, and at that same circuit at the Nürburgring, for those who don't know anything about motorsport, there is a GT race there that is singularly the most famous and prestigious race in the world, called the Nürburgring 24-hour race, and my son won that in a Mercedes car. So I think probably tonight what I wanted to share with you all was the idea around fear. I think we all know what that feels like. And it's that little gremlin that often sits on the shoulder and jumps up and goes, you know, don't do that because, you know, something might happen. Are there many parents in the audience tonight? Yes, great. Well, I don't know about you, but my greatest fear as a parent is actually to lose a child. I used to wake up in the middle of the night and run to the kids' rooms to make sure that they were still breathing. I'm sure some of you have done the same thing. So, as a motorsport family, fear was very in our faces every single week, because my husband used to race at the weekends, and in those days, many of our friends never came back. And of course, then I continued on with my son, who also I had to go every single weekend to his races. Fear is one of those funny things. And whilst my biggest fear being losing a child, I ended up having to actually face that fear. Because in 2013, my son was killed at a racetrack in Australia. He was teaching 2 rookies when the car left the track, went straight down, no brakes, into the gravel trap that hadn't been raked, into the tyres that splayed, they shouldn't have, and behind that was a concrete wall. He was killed outright. The driver survived, but of course with huge injuries and mental scars. So I had to take this little gremlin that was on my shoulder and that sits behind us so often, fear, which is so important to us as human beings, because without it we would not know if we were going to be killed. So it's a very important part of us. But that little gremlin came here, right in my face. And everywhere I looked, every morning I woke up, here I was, fear. My worst fear. Now, on that race weekend that Sean went, he had assumed a lot of things at the track. He had assumed that the track was up to FIA standards. For those who don't know about motorsport, FIA is the Formula 1 Association. They are the governing body of motorsport. Now, if there is a championship running at one of the races, the FIA have regulations. The track has to be up to FIA regulation. On the website, it said that the track was an FIA standard track, but actually on that day, because it was a track day, they didn't have to bring it up to FIA standards. That's not said in the small print or anywhere on the website. So everybody going there thought this is a safe track. My son assumed it was a safe track. It wasn't. He assumed that the car that was provided to him was serviced. It wasn't. He assumed he was in a safe environment, but he was wrong. And actually, since his death in 2013, there's actually been 3 more deaths on the same circuit. The signs were there because actually in motorsport you often see crashes. I'm sure you see them in the papers. But that year, within the year, there were actually 3 other deaths. His best friend, Alan Simonson, was taken out of the Le Mans 24-hour race. And Jules Bianchi, our Formula 1 driver, was also killed. 3 freak accidents. Out of the norm. Effectively a black swan. And I'm sure some of you here are aware of the theory of the black swan. But when a black swan event happens, it's out of the normal that we would expect for, let's say, a race. For example, 9/11 was a black swan. Now, people in motorsport tend to rationalize, or they like to rationalize these accidents, because it makes them feel better. And I don't want to rationalize any more. I don't want to feel that we are just looking at motorsport and waiting for another death. I think we should be learning from aviation, who has taken the black swan, and what they've done is they've actually started to stop a black swan happening. So as the events happen in the air, they jump on them in order for it not to get to a black swan. And I think that's what we should be doing in motorsport. So, thanks, Joseph. No. Sorry. There we go. So, thank you, Joseph. When my son was killed, I thought, how on earth am I going to face my fear? How can I live this life without having my son around me? I thought, Sean and I were very much into quantum physics. We used it in his racing, we used it in his career, we used it in his thinking. It's why he actually won the Monaco Super Cup Porsche in the Porsche 25 seconds ahead. To this day, nobody's ever been able to even reach him. And his data is given out to everybody. Nobody can get there. So I created a foundation, Sean Edwards Foundation, to actually try to look at addressing some of the issues around these accidents. Now for me, in quantum physics, as we know in physics, the 2 cells that we start with actually never leave this earth if we die. We die physically, okay? But actually those cells stay here on earth. They never ever live. So my way of continuing with Sean is actually to create the foundation. And he lives on then just in another way. The foundation's been a lifeline for me as well, because it's pulled me through. And to share with you the logo, in starting a brand, as a lot of you know, I feel it has to be, the brand has to come from the heart. Here we have Sean's helmet. Every racing driver in motorsport is recognised by his helmet, not by his name. You have SEF. The reason I did it like that was because actually you have passed the racetrack. And the red here is actually the blood my son spilled in the name of safety. So during the course after his death, many drivers all around the world came to me. I traveled the world speaking to everybody about what happened, how we could better communicate, how we could stop these assumptions, how we could actually do something that's going to improve safety in motorsport. So I went around gathering all these ideas up and to try to sort of make sense of them. And, you know, it was not easy because during the course of that time when I was gathering all of these ideas, and as I gathered the ideas, I threw them out on the floor every so often, and I put a few of them on a string like this. And I think, okay, well, that idea fits there, that fits there, and that fits there, and that's okay there. And let's see if we can actually string them all together and actually make something of it. That's the way I think. During this time, my business, McKinley Spaces, was flourishing in London. We had, unfortunately, several properties under construction, but because my head was in my family, the death of my son, trying to keep my lifeline going here, keep myself going, I had all these balls in the air, and I was actually drowning. So I thought, what am I going to let go? My biggest fear on the business side was actually letting my business go because of the loss of the business and the loss of money. So another fear I had to face. So what I did was Foundation McKinley Spaces. I thought everybody's on my back getting questions, banks, finance, the lot, because there's only me. There's only me that could answer all these questions. So I thought, I can't keep it going. So I just sat back and I just went, you know, actually, let it crash. Who cares? What's important in life? And that's exactly what I did. Because actually, later on I could pick it up. So, with all these little ideas I had, because that's the only thing I could really focus on, what I was trying to do is to actually start to get motorsport community to actually communicate better. I want to set new global standards. So I came up with an idea within the GT racing, which is the biggest racing in the world. Everybody thinks it's Formula One, but actually outside Formula One is the majority of the motorsport. And in the GT racing, we have a mishmash of GT drivers, professionals from Formula One and otherwise, and we have gentleman drivers who pay to come and race with the pros. Now, there's a discrepancy between the two. It's very dangerous on the track because they don't know what they're doing. And I came up with an idea, a test. Okay, why don't we actually test these guys? Because as I went around from country to country, I found everything was localized, including the licensing of these drivers. So they were coming into these championships not knowing what the championships rules, regulations, flag systems, race protocols were, and jeopardizing our pro drivers. So what I did was I went to the biggest GT racing people in the world, Stefan Rattel, did a presentation to him in London, and he bought the idea, and I piloted it with them. And over 18 months, we developed that test. We tested it in the drivers. Sometimes you don't know how these tests are going to go, but actually it was accepted. It's improved safety in GT racing, and it is now being implemented into many other series all around the world. Now, that was one idea that came out of these little beads, stringing things together, because it was a safety problem. And the other problems that I have is actually the problem between the motorsport and pickup at point of crash and the contingency services, and how we actually manage the crowds outside the barrier, let's say, in the bigger picture. And how can I communicate this around the world without it having to go to country. So what I've done is I've gathered up all these little gems here, and I'm going to show you a little video now to what I've been working on for the last year to pull all these ideas together. It's effectively a very innovative technological platform. Okay? Let's have the lights up, that'd be great. Joseph? So, death is not fatal. It's definitely not final. We can live on in a different way. And failure is not final. We can always start again. But we need courage to continue to make a difference. Thank you so much for listening.